In the Sahara and the deserts of the Middle East, where a whole summer can pass without a single drop of rain and bare soil bakes hot enough to cook an egg, Nomad and Oasis gardeners keep melons, dates, figs, and squash alive with no tank, no pump, no plastic liner, using a trench packed with coarse sand that costs about 50 cents to build. If this is the kind of dry climate secret you came for, do me a favor and subscribe. It's the easiest way to catch more desert and drought gardening tricks that make your garden tougher, cheaper, and greener. Because here's the thing, that trench isn't a curiosity. It's a buried water store, a hidden reservoir sitting under the sand, and it's one you can steal right now for your own dry summer bed. Now, you won't find this in a glossy catalog. You won't find it stamped on a bag at the garden center. This is knowledge that lives in a world almost nobody enters, passed hand to hand among growers on the desert margin from one generation to the next, spoken more than written, and it survives for one blunt reason. It works. It works in the single hardest place on earth to keep a plant alive, where every other method fails and the sun wins by lunchtime. So, let me be plain about what that means for you. This cuts your watering, it shrinks your water bill, and it beats baked, thirsty soil through the ugliest, most punishing summer your climate can throw at you. Every bit of it. But before any of it makes sense, we have to talk about the one thing that quietly runs the whole show: evaporation. Just that. In open desert soil, the sun doesn't gently warm the ground. It reaches in and pulls the moisture straight up and out like a wick. The top few inches turn to dust while the roots underneath sit there parched. You water in the morning, and by afternoon the surface is dry and cracked again, and the plant never really got a drink. The water didn't go down to the roots. It went up into the air, gone. Picture a wet towel, pin it on a clothesline in blazing sun, and in an hour it's bone dry. Take that same wet towel, same water, same amount, and shut it inside a cooler. Days later, it's still damp. Nothing changed but where the water sits. Out in the open, the heat robs it in an hour. Tucked away below the surface, it barely loses a thing. Same water. Wildly different loss. And if your bed's baked to dust days after you water them, if you're standing there with the hose wondering where it all went, that is the exact problem those desert growers solved. So stay with me. Get that one idea in your head and everything else in this video clicks into place. Because that's the enemy, that's the thief. The desert doesn't kill plants with drought so much as it kills them by stealing the water you give them before the roots can reach it. Bare, open soil is a losing game. You pour water in the top, the sun takes most of it back off the top, and the plant lives on the scraps. So the whole trick, the whole 50-cent miracle, comes down to a single question. How do you hide water from the sun? How do you take a summer's worth of moisture and bank it somewhere the heat can't touch it, then let the roots pull it out slowly for weeks? And the answer those desert gardeners landed on is almost insulting in how simple it is. Sand. A channel of plain, coarse sand. The very stuff we curse. The stuff that won't hold a plant. Won't hold nutrients. Won't hold anything. That's what we call bad soil. So think about it for a second. How does a channel of sand, the very thing we call bad soil, hold water when the desert itself can't? The answer hides in the sand itself, in the gaps between the coarse grains. But before that trench can hold a single drop, water has to reach it. And where that water comes from in a place with no rain is the first thing almost nobody expects. So the trench doesn't sit just anywhere. You dig it exactly where that runaway water already wants to go. After a rare storm, there's a moment where the whole surface turns into a shallow, racing sheet, and it follows the low ground, the wash, the dip, the natural channel gravity, carved long before anyone showed up with a spade. That's where you dig, right in the path of the water. So instead of watching that sheet tear across the surface and vanish into the horizon, you funnel it straight down into your channel and trap it. And here's the beautiful part. You don't need a desert storm to make this work. Aim your roof runoff into it, point your hose into it. Same principle, same trench. The desert gardener catches a storm that lasts minutes. You catch the water you were already pouring anyway. The location does half the work for free. So the water's in the channel. Now comes the question that flips everything. What do you fill that channel with? And the answer is the one that sounds wrong. Coarse sand, not fine soil. The gritty stuff. The stuff a catalog would tell you is bad for growing anything. Think about why fine soil feels like the good choice. Fine soil clings to water. Rich, dense, holds moisture beautifully. You water it and it stays damp. The trouble is where it stays damp. It clings to that water right at the surface, in the top inch or two, which is exactly the zone the sun owns. Fine soil holds your water in the one place. The desert can reach it and cook it away. Coarse sands does the opposite, and this is the part that flips everything you've been told about good garden soil. Read that twice. Between big grains of coarse sand, there are big gaps, air spaces. So water doesn't cling near the top. It sinks. Fast, straight down, past the killing zone, deep into the fill where the sun can't follow. Then it stops, held in all those little pockets between the grains, sitting quietly like a hidden sponge buried in the ground. So the very thing that makes coarse sand worse at the surface, that it won't hold water where you can see it, is the exact thing that makes it the best material on Earth for banking water underground. The water drops below the reach of evaporation and just waits. And you need to feel how much that matters, because the sun in open soil is not a gentle thief. Bare, uncovered soil can lose the great majority of applied water to evaporation before a single root ever gets a drink. The majority, gone into the air. Let me put a number you can actually picture on that. Line 4 glasses of water up on the edge of your garden bed. Pour all 4 onto bare, open soil under a hot sun. 3 of them vanish, straight up into the air before the plant tastes a drop. The plant survives on the 4th. That's the tax the sun charges on open ground, and most gardeners pay it every single day without ever seeing the bill. Picture your own hose right now. 3 of every 4 glasses you pour on bare soil this summer never reach the plant. You're standing there watering the sky. Now flip it. Send that same water below the surface, into coarse sand, under a cap of soil, and the sun barely touches it. You keep nearly all of it. Almost the whole reservoir stays down there for the roots. 4 glasses in, 4 glasses banked, instead of 4 in and 1 left. And sit with what that means for the desert margin gardener. A storm blows through in minutes and disappears. But that trench catches its sheet of runoff, drops it deep into the grit, and turns a few violent minutes of rain into weeks of buried water. In a channel that cost about 50 cents of sand and 1 afternoon with a spade. No tank, no pump, no liner. A storm that lasted minutes, banked for a month. So here's what you take home right now, before anything else. Stop watering the surface, where the sun wins every time. Get your moisture below the top few inches, where it's safe. And the coarser your fill, the deeper the water goes. But here's the catch. The storm's water is now banked deep in the sand, safe from the sun. And a plant's roots don't reach down into a trench of loose grit. So that's the question that decides whether any of this actually works. How does buried water climb back up sideways for weeks and reach the thirsty plant? The answer is a force you can watch happen on your kitchen table. It's called capillary action, and it's about the least dramatic sounding phrase in gardening. But it's the whole engine here. Water climbing through tiny gaps all on its own against gravity. That's it. That's the trick that keeps a melon alive through a rainless summer. In the ground, the fine soil packed around your sand trench, and every hair-thin root the plant sends out, they all pull at that buried moisture and wick it sideways and upward, out of the reservoir and into the plant. Not in a flood, drop by drop. A slow, steady feed that runs for weeks while the surface above bakes to dust. Try the paper towel test tonight, and you'll be watching the exact force that keeps a desert garden alive. Dip 1 corner in a glass of water and watch the wet line creep up the paper, higher than the water level. Defying every instinct you have about which way water is supposed to go, that climb is happening under a Nomad gardener's melons right now, and this is where the whole thing finally closes into a loop. Remember what we're actually dealing with. A storm in the Sahara, or on a desert margin that might last minutes once in a year with no other rain, minutes of water. That runoff gets caught in the trench, sinks deep into the coarse grains, and sits there below the killing heat. Then, for the rest of that scorching, rainless summer, the figs and the squash and the melons drink it back up through capillary action, quietly, day after day. Surface bone dry, reservoir below, feeding. One short storm, banked and rationed by physics for months. Now here's the part I love, because this is the promise cashing out. To hold a summer's worth of water underground, you need, what? A tank? A pump? A pressurized drip system with a controller and a filter? No. You need about 50 cents of coarse sand and an afternoon with a spade. That's the entire bill. Set that against the tanks and pumps that run into hundreds of dollars. All the gear the catalogs will happily sell you. And you start to understand why this knowledge got passed hand to hand out on the desert margins, instead of ending up in a store. It's too cheap to sell. So let me hand you the build plainly, in the order you'd actually do it. Dig a narrow trench along your thirstiest bed, or just below it on the downhill side, where water naturally wants to travel. Fill that trench with coarse sand or grit. Not fine soil, remember. The big gaps are the whole point. That's what lets water sink fast and deep instead of clinging to the top where the sun robs it. Then cap the top with soil and mulch, so the surface seals the reservoir, away from the sun, the way a lid keeps a wet towel cool, and direct your hose or your roof runoff into the trench, so the water charges the store underground instead of running off across the surface or baking away in an hour. If you've got a spade and about 50 cents of sand, you already own everything a Nomad gardener uses. The only thing missing is the trench. That's not a figure of speech. Same physics, same materials, same reservoir. Yours just happens to have a hose feeding it instead of a once-a-year storm. And then the one habit that changes everything. Water into the trench, not the surface. And water less often. Stop sprinkling the top of your bed and watching 3 of every 4 glasses vanish into the air before your plant ever tastes them. Pour it where it sinks below the sun's reach, and let the buried store do the daily feeding. You do less, the reservoir does more. That's the swap. Step back and look at what that actually means. Growers in some of the driest places on Earth, months without rain, soil that'll cook an egg, wells rationed to the drop, can bank a whole summer of water in a trench of sand that costs pocket change. If they can do that there, then your dry spell isn't a sentence, your hose ban isn't a wall, your heat wave isn't the end of the tomatoes. It's a problem that's already been solved, buried in the sand, waiting for you to dig. Think back to where we started. Bare soil so hot, the sun pulls the moisture straight out of it. The top few inches turn to powder while the roots go thirsty. That impossibility from the first minute, food surviving in that, it isn't a mystery anymore. It's a spade and 50 cents away in your own yard this weekend. If it works in the driest place on Earth, your dry summer is no excuse. Thanks for digging into this one with me. I'll see you next time for the next secret buried out in the sand.